Welcome to another episode of the Career Talks podcast. I'm your host, Orlando Haynes. And again, each and every week, I bring you amazing guests. If you hear a loud buzzing in the background, we have the carpet guy, or should I say the couch cleaner here at the same time as the broadcast. So apologize, folks. So I'll be muting in and out to dissipate that noise, but we will press forward. So before we get started, make sure you're subscribing to the podcast on Apple, Spotify, and YouTube so I can continue to bring you some incredible guests like we have today. So absolutely excited to speak with Danielle. You've seen the promotion on it, who is a Gen Z expert, speaker, and a creator. And so this is the first time we were just talking that I have someone specifically talking about the Gen Z community and their voice. And let's debunk a lot of the misconceptions of what's going on with that population there in that strong community of talent. So without further ado, let me bring on the amazing, talented Danielle Farage.
Hello, hello. Glad to be here.
Glad you can join. I know you're all over the place. You've been traveling from city to city.
I
Uh,
have.
so super, super excited that you can make time for me today. But share with the folks, Danielle, the folks who don't know you, more about you and your background.
For sure. So I'm Danielle Farage, like Garage with an F, and I speak about Gen Z and intergenerational communications in the workplace. It's been a really personal journey for me. I started my work experience in some of a toxic environment, and have always, since I was maybe a little girl, like 7 years old, I've always thought and like played pretend workplace. I've always thought about how can we make work better and make work for everyone. And that really then was the impetus, I think, for me studying psychology and being kind of a little bit people obsessed. And I know that I've heard from many HR folk that if you like people, you should not be going into HR. So that's what I didn't do. And I essentially went into working for HR tech startups. And within the roles that I did, I was working really closely with HR professionals and DI and talent acquisition folks, and leading a community called the Recruitment Automation Community, which brought together it was the intersection of AI and human process. And this was back in 2020 when we were, no one was really talking about AI. So it was a really fascinating role. And in that role, because I was facilitating so many conversations with these really high powered recruiting and talent executives, I just noticed, like, we're talking about redefining work, but we're not necessarily including the youngest people in the room. And as someone who studied psychology with the intention of being able to walk into any room, talk to people about what matters to them, and then ultimately bring those insights back to the decision makers in the boardroom and help them make better decisions about people at scale, I was like, oh, here I am. Like, this is why I'm here. This is why I'm in these rooms. And so I started to post about, what Gen Z specifically is looking for from leadership. And I at the time, there were just a few maybe articles coming out about Gen Z being lazy or entitled. And fast forward, 5 years, it's at a level where, we're starting to try to tune it out, but it's definitely, we're getting a lot of the same backlash that millennials, Gen X, boomers, and probably every generation since the dawn of time has received.
Wow, and that's funny because when we just before we went on air, I'm sorry, this background noise is killing me, folks. But that I'm surprised that we're still at this pace or at this conversation because of the value you all bring to the table, and it's just evolution of you have to bring in young talent to replace the next generation that's going out. And so, what have you seen that's been consistent? I know the term lazy, like you said, 5 years ago was the real big thing. In one of your posts, I think you said we don't want to work harder; we just want to work smarter. And so, speak to what that clip was referencing and the context around that.
Definitely. So in my day-to-day work, I'm either speaking to organizations or at conferences about the generation. I'm consulting with companies to help them really develop new plans and programs to help upskill younger generations and also help managers manage these generations. And third and finally, I do a lot of content. So that's what you're really speaking to. And a lot of the content is informed, again, by my work. And one of the things that I've noticed is that every generation comes into the workplace with different tools, challenges, and perspectives. And Gen Z is no different, right? But the pace of change is. And one of the pieces of backlash I often hear is like, well, generations don't really matter. And we shouldn't be talking about this because they're just labels and they're generalizations and it doesn't help anyone. Right. And it just creates barriers. And, I respect that opinion. I think, when we do separate people, it does often lead to exactly that, right? That polarization. However, I think that the pros outweigh the cons. And naturally, our brains differentiate between people and we categorize. That's just how we, that's just how our brains work. It's basic psychology. And so Gen Z, if you take a step back and think about the macro, the macroeconomics of like how we've come into the world of work, we've entered into a space where traditional work is maybe 5% of the experience. We've entered into a world of AI, remote work, mental health crisis, environmental crises, all at once. And so, of course, we're going to bring new expectations to the table. And I think the differentiating part about this generation is we're here to talk about them. I think some people would like to dictate them. And I think that we do bring a certain level of emotional intelligence just because of the access to information that we've had, that we're able to have more conversations. We're able to understand how things work a little bit faster and come up with solutions a little bit faster. We're very creative in our thinking. But I think that the challenge that we face is communication of those ideas or thoughts, or types of innovation. And we're not necessarily being invited to the table. And so that's what I'm trying to create space for, is for us to understand each other better so that those biases can be less of blockers and more of bridges that create change.
I love what you said, because if I were to sum it up a bit, it would sound like to me in my head, it's the old guard with that same methodology of thinking and using phrases like this is the way we've always done it. And so when it's time for the changing of guards, they're just not flexible or have done the research or considered the value, the next generation should bring, knowing that there's a vast difference of experience, and just really, like you said, opening that bridge to communicate and say, okay, there's still going to be a commonality between us at some point. We want to do good work and do the work, right? If the mission's the same, then we can work out all the little ancillary stuff. But it still seems like from with your work, there's that stark still like, hey, we don't think maybe this, the Gen Zers have the talent, the skill set, the thought process to what we've built so far in an organization. And so
Exactly.
when you hear stuff like that, and you're on the front lines pressing through to say, hey, give us a seat at the table, what are those conversations like? Or for the most part, do you hear more no's than yeses? What does that look like?
I would say that I try to surround myself with more change makers than naysayers. So that's my goal, right? And I think the content that I create will naturally attract those people who are thinking forward, and also people who have kids, right? We're talking about a generation who is in leadership, who many of them have kids who are Gen Z or Gen Alpha. And so there's a certain level of, personal appeal that I try to make when I do my keynotes. And one of the first slides I put on the screen, after I have everyone take a communal breath, is actually how do you want your children to experience work or feel at work? I think it's feel. And I would say, yeah, I would say so because of my content, I do attract this certain level of person who's like, okay, I understand that this generation is different and they're also less experienced. Both facts, right? And I think the key differentiator between these types of people who are willing to lean in and the ones who aren't is the recognition that just because you're young or less experienced doesn't mean that you don't have something powerful and valuable to contribute and bring to the table. Doesn't mean that we shouldn't make space for you. And those people are the people who are ready to lean in and look for solutions. I would say that the most common things I hear from leaders are things like, well, this generation just doesn't know how to work hard. And like you said, referring back to that video, I think that we just have more tools to work smarter. It's like it's the difference between, and I think this is a very common discussion in like the remote work and hybrid world, and how do we work better is like the difference between placing value on time versus placing value on productivity or impact. And I think that Gen Z is much more motivated to place value on impact, because if you hire me for a certain job, let's say I have to sell 30 packages of, some sort of service a month. And if I can use AI to do that within, let's say, 5 hours a day versus 8 hours a day, then I'm going to do that. Does it mean that I should get more work? Incrementally, right? And it's all about like, and one of the things that I talk about, actually, one of my keynotes is about what do you do with that time that you've now saved? How you've optimized your time, right? Like, how do we reinvest that time back into the organization? And of course, we can continue to become profitable, but ultimately, how do we then carve out the space to focus on things like mental health? Because according to a new study today, 7 out of 10 Gen Zers are feeling burned out at work. I think it might even be higher. 7 out of 10 workers generally are burned out at work.
Right.
And yeah, and it's just kind of like, well, how can we reinvest that into mental health? How can we reinvest that into culture building and into upskilling, right? There's all these types of things that I think are important, but that we might just overlook because we're all focused on productivity and time management and all these things.
And what's funny about everything you just said, which is 100% correct, when organizations think about, okay, freeing, if this person is highly productive and they completed their work, whatever it is, in less time than projected, let's add more work, right? And then the next question that never happens: are you going to add more income because I was hired for X, and
Right.
just because I'm more efficient doesn't mean I should be doing a second job or a second and a half job just because I figured out how to be more efficient in my
Right.
function. That's exactly what you paid me
Yeah.
for. From there, now if we're talking about how do I do more overall because my capacity lends itself to that, then we should have another conversation. Okay, now we're stretching. Once we hit that stretch function or that stretch role or stretch duties, we should be having a conversation, and that never happens for the most part. Not that I've been in this space over 20 years. I'm like, that rarely happens unless you're in sales, and it's just based off, like you said, selling 30 widgets, and I'm compensated based on that end result. But from a
Right.
we call the salary now the fixed income, right? Where you're working 60, 70 hours, but you're only getting paid for the 40 a
Right.
week. Yeah.
And I think that's right, the reaction to that of Gen Z and what people commonly see and experience as managers as well. They don't want to work longer than 8 hours. Like, they go home at 5. Like, I don't want someone like that, right? And so there's this sort of like this just downward spiral of things that are happening, that are occurring. But if we actually take a step back and address the fact that Gen Z is operating in a system that was not built for us, and it was not built with the existing technology in mind or even at the center, and that we're not placing value as much on impact, but we are on hours, like, let's start to question that behavior, right? And I think this goes into a whole other discussion that I've been having lately, which is it actually started last year. I was at this conference called the ISG Future of Work Summit, and that was where I spoke about this like AI and process, and how do you fill the time that you use with other things, culture building activities. And so I hosted a roundtable discussion at lunch, and I had someone from a very big company, very big brand name, who's been in the headlines the past year in a negative way, come to me and say, I've been mentoring a few Gen Z professionals within the organization, and one of them specifically is having a really hard time. He wants to be promoted. However, he's not willing to do the hard work. Well, my first question, what do you think it was? How do you define hard work?
Correct.
And that's a series that I've actually taken to the Muse and partnered with them, because they're an incredible, not only an employer brand platform, but they have really been in this millennial, young professional Gen Z space for so many years. And we did a series all about redefining terms, because things like professionalism and hard work might mean something, and do in fact mean something incredibly different to you versus me. And so how do we take those learnings inside the organization is, well, if I've actually, yeah. So going back to this manager, she then said, well, I don't know, like, I guess we have a job description that we use to hire him. And I was like, well, how often are you revisiting that job description, going through each point and actually reviewing him based on the KPIs? And she's like, oh, I don't know. Like, I'm not his manager, but I assume that like he's not getting as much direction as he probably needs. And I also said, well, also consider this. What type of work are you doing? Like, how are you working? And she said, we've traditionally been an in-office company. However, we've been remote first since the pandemic. And I asked her, I was like, so do you think that, you say to me that he has a challenge with getting promoted. A, do you understand why he wants to be promoted? Because it's likely something, beyond just money. But secondly, does he have a great example of what that promotion friendly or promotion deserving behavior looks like within the organization that he could look up to, right? Because it's all about how do we, there's a certain word for it. It's like in apprenticeships, right? How do you like copy someone else's behavior?
Yep.
And she said, probably not, because he's been remote first, and he hasn't really had someone to show him what it looks like to deserve that promotion. So those are like, that's one of a pretty good example of how, how the mismatch and trying to apply old world thinking to a new world really impacts the generations, but specifically younger generations right now in the workplace.
And so because that initially sounded like where the manager was looking at hard work, tying it to the amount of time you spend, doing work versus
or at the organization generally.
Correct. Physically present and like seeing that you're here for an extended period of time versus the level of productivity that's getting done. And so, yeah, that can get so blended and confusing in that overlap of thinking to say, well, if I'm here 60 hours, 70 hours a week, and again, I'm only paid for the 40, is the additional 30 hours that I'm putting in productive, or is it busy work, or does it look like work just to, get to the next stage? And if is that the culture here, that I have to put in these, ghost hours, but physically just to see like I'm doing something to go to the next level? Is that
right.
the culture we're thinking in? For the most part, you're right, Danielle. You're absolutely right. That's the old guard, in the old model of thinking. Like, I don't see you here, so my assumption is you're not working. Well, you can.
Right.
Today's age, I can be here all day and really not be producing anything, right?
Right. And often I hear, "Oh, well, they come to the office, but they're always on their phones." And okay, sure. Like we are pretty addicted to our phones. Like any study will find that. And who gave us the technology? And who enabled us with the technology? Who built the technology? It wasn't us. So now we're all starting to question, well, how often do I want to be on my phone? But it's not because of any, it might be a parent who's saying, well, how often are you on your phone? And at the same time, how many people listening have you how many of you have gone on, a website and like started shopping during the workday because you had nothing to do and you had downtime? Like, I think we're kind of kidding ourselves if we think that we have been heads down, focus mode, 9 to 5 every single day. And the thing that I question, honestly, all the time is like, how did we go so long, like since the industrial era, requiring people to work in an office that they have no control over the environment, probably fluorescent lighting, probably in cubicles, right, most of the time, and been productive the same hours every day. We all have different brains. I'm a neurodivergent thinker. I thrive when there is like natural light and certain hours of the day. Monday morning, do not talk to me. Like, I'm just saying, like, I block out my Monday mornings for like self-care, easing into the week, planning my week, because I know that I'm not productive on a Monday morning. So how can, it's so that's just one of the questions I've always had is like, how do we actually expect people to all be productive at the same exact time? I just don't think that that's actually realistic. But enough of that. Enough of me.
It's funny because it made me think of what Jeff Bezos said. I saw a quick video interview about him. He said even at his level, right, his first meetings are not conducted until 10 a.m. He muddles around, gets the family together, the kids to school, whatever he does, reads the newspaper, etc. Because he realized his most optimum time of thinking and brain power is between like 10 and 2. He said after that, and I make just, the big decisions. He goes, after that, he's like, I'm really no good. He goes, but I make sure that I'm not, taking calls, heavy decisions at 8 a.m., 7 a.m., not, he's
Right.
like, I can't take any meetings until 10 because that's when I know I've reached my peak. and now I'm at my prime time to say, okay, I'm ready to function. And so I think people have to realize that piece too. Regardless, you come in, you have meetings all day, and it's like after the third meeting in a row or fourth meeting in a row, how mush is your brain at that point to where you're like, I don't remember the last 2 meetings, and I'm supposed to give some incredible insight in these next 3. Like, I have nothing left mentally to give.
Yeah, and I think that's what a lot of these tools, these new AI tools are really helpful for. It's like if you put enough information into a chat GPT to actually then serve you later on and be like, when you show up to just like this, right? Like if I'm showing up to a podcast recording and I haven't prepped, I could literally just type in a chat GPT, hey, can you come up with some talking points for me? Talking about overall, like this is the topic and this is the summary of the talk. Can you come up with some talking points based on my past 3 months of content? Beautiful. It's my favorite thing in the world because it's so efficient, and it would take me so much longer and so much more brain power to reproduce and repurpose what I actually already created and things I've actually already thought about and talked about publicly. So that's how I'm using AI.
You might have to give a private class on that. I think that's phenomenal. That'll work in both spaces.
Let's do it.
When like I'm saying, I'll collab with you anytime. So when you think about the conversations you've been having, in with the corporations and clients that you work with, what's been the aha moments that's broken, or should I say, broken a misconception to now they're like, ah, I got it. That makes so much sense,
Mm,
Danielle.
hmm. It's a good question. I have to think about it.
Yeah, we can circle back. No worries.
Yeah. I mean, I would probably say recently I was at Transform, and one of the things that we were talking about was, you know, Gen Z and like the career pathing.
Hmm.
So I was on a panel with the VP of talent acquisition, I believe, or maybe it was VP of HR of Handshake and 2B TV, joined by Kyle Forrest from Deloitte. He's incredible. And one of the things that we had talked about in the pre-panel conversation that also came up on the panel that I think Valerie voiced, but I brought up initially on the call was like, we are forcing many Gen Zers into a specific path. Like when I was in college, I think it was like the number one coolest thing and most sought after thing was going into finance, consulting,
Hmm.
or maybe tech. Um, and when I, as a researcher in my everyday, when I look at the macro trends of where there's layoffs, where money is being invested, where jobs, are where
Hmm.
opportunity lies, I think of the really intense and rigorous path of going from, and I'm going to take you even back before college, like you're in high school, you're in middle school, and you're thinking about what college or what high school should I get to go into the right college. And once
Hmm.
you're in that high school, what college should I get to get the right job? And once you're in that job, maybe if you're lucky, where do I do next?
Right.
And we find ourselves, many young people, many millennials, I think, went through this as well, uh, in this kind of weird position where it's like, oh, I've actually never really thought about what I truly want. And I've always been trying to fit into someone else's box of what I'm supposed to be or who I'm supposed to, you know, follow or how I'm supposed to think. And oftentimes now I've actually heard it a lot. It's like people don't want to hire the Harvard MBAs because they don't think they might think in a business degree type of way. But there was actually a really incredible piece in Harvard Business Review, maybe a year and a half ago, about how companies are not hiring as many MBA grads, and they're more so hiring the people who are right out of high school that are like coding geniuses. So anyway, I say that all to say, many of us go onto this path, and meanwhile, a lot of the opportunities there are really not for entry level. Much of the opportunities are disappearing by the day because AI is coming in, and more hiring managers are motivated to hire AI versus hire a new grad who requires a lot more attention and skilling and training. And so now I'm looking at this, I'm like, okay, here's like that situation over here, but then you also have all these other industries like the trades and construction and manufacturing and industrial. And I just attended an intelligence conference, which powers a lot of the manufacturing in this country, which is getting trillions of dollars invested into. And we then start to say, oh, well, why is it that these other, areas are kind of taboo and like no one's talking about them? And so I think bringing that up of like make trades cool again because many people who are in the trades can actually afford the lifestyle that they want. They have the stability, the flexibility, the entrepreneurial spirit, that much of Gen Z actually craves. And so that was one of the aha moments, I think, from that conversation. And Valerie, after the panel, I know she posted about it and got a lot of attention, because it's true. Like, why are we kind of poo-pooing the trades or things that we do with our hands, or just like unsexy industries that actually have a lot of opportunity? And there are companies like Aviva, who I was with last week, who are investing heavily in next generation because they have to, because there's a talent shortage, but also because they want to, because they recognize that we have what it takes to bring new innovation to market. We have the creativity, the openness to new tech, and the curiosity to do so.
So you're definitely in my warehouse right now when it comes to the day job, is in that trades, in the engineering space, like we chatted briefly before we came on, and you hit it right on the head. It's no longer sexy, but it's the foundation of so many things that we enjoy. It's
Of
the people
society.
of society, right? How it was built through trade skills. And so when you think about, and this can be the mindset of a lot of folks who may not see it being attractive anymore, because who knows, social media, you have to have this lifestyle, wear these type of clothes, looking high rise office, and the perception is the trades doesn't give you that, right? It's
Mhm.
dirty, it's grimy, it's back breaking, but it's absolutely the foundation of America, in the one of the most stable industries in this country, right?
Yeah.
So
It's the
I
foundation
get it.
of my family. Like,
Yeah.
my dad came, when he was 21, he came from Israel to the US, moved here with like $800 in his pocket, and he built
Mm-hmm.
his now thriving business, which is an indoor go-karting and entertainment business, which is very fun. He's 5 locations on the East Coast. He's built that on the back of building another business, which was in construction, high-end construction in New York City. So that's actually where he was able to build the foundation for what was later, a passion project turned real business.
Yeah.
And that is the type of, obviously that's long term. We're talking about, he went from, 25 years old, started his business, and then until around like 45, and then started this new business, and he's been doing it for 15 years. And obviously that's long term, which I think Gen Z is, we tend to be very short term focused. And that's one thing, but also that's the type of life that we want to build for ourselves, right? 70% of us want to own one or more businesses in our
Mm-hmm.
lifetimes. And so it's, as I look more into the data and look into the lifestyles that these types of careers really do provide, like, I'm like, oh, this actually makes a lot of sense. But now it's about telling the story of why.
So, to your last point about the multiple streams, do you think that Gen Zs are looking at it from lack of trust in the government? So, like, hey, or current instability in corporate America, and I can't rely on just the one stream. I need to be able to, have this flexibility. Or is it lifestyle? Like, I want a certain lifestyle, and if I can't get into the most elite and you know opportunities, that's not going to pay me that. I got to create multiple streams.
I think it's both. The second one I'll start with, because it's pretty simple. I think that we look at millennials, and we look at the experience of work of millennials and the type of path they followed, which is very
Mhm.
much the climb up the corporate ladder, go to a good school, then climb up a corporate ladder, and maybe get some wealth from that. And we look at that and we think, most millennials are burnt out, and can't afford a home. So we don't, that's like not where we want to go. And so we're kind of rerouting and saying that won't work for my mental health, and B, how I want to live, and the type of freedom I want to have, and the experience of life I want to have. And so we're rerouting and we're saying, oh, okay, so first I, need to start my own business, because that's how you get financial freedom, and freedom generally in this world. You look at every single, nearly every person that this generation looks up to is an entrepreneur, right? You think of Gary Vaynerchuk's of the world, and that's who this generation is listening to, right? Like Alex Cooper's of the world, like, and these people have all built their own businesses, and so we really highly value entrepreneurship. I also think that there is a degree to which it is glamorized and over glamorized, because as an entrepreneur, I'm like, this is really freaking hard. And because of social media and because of the pressure of like, my business needs to succeed, there's less incentive to be sharing those more vulnerable parts of and hardships of building a business. And so it's often over glamorized. But I would say even before, even like taking the millennial part out of the equation, this generation really highly values leveraging what we already have and seeing that we have technology, that it's so easy to start a business. You could do it in 2 minutes today. Why not use that? And I think if any other generation were born at this time, they would be doing the same exact thing.
Mm-hmm. Makes sense. It makes 100% sense. So here's a scenario question for you. You have the room, all CEOs, executives, etc. It's the old guard, and it's just you, just Danielle Farage. What are the things you're telling them to that they should consider when, connecting and needing to bridge the gap with the Gen Zs in today's what I like to call career economy?
I would probably ask a question, and I would ask, if you think about the early career experience at your organization right now, how many of you would want to stay? And I feel like, those shows like, what's that show? Undercover Boss.
Mm-hmm.
Those are always the most powerful shows. Those programs that put people on, in the day-to-day, driving the Ubers and working in the kitchen and like really like doing the work that probably no one really wants to do.
Yep.
Those are the best experiences, because they actually provide so much insight as to how you feel when you're doing the work, what the experience is like, why you might stay, why you might leave. And I think if I were to ask specifically the CEOs and that type of demographic, that question of like, hey, do you even know what it's like to live in a day in the life of like a young professional in your organization? Like, do you know what the typical experience is? And if I were also to maybe do an internal audit and like collect some quotes, of course I'd be fair. Of course I'd have, a fair representation of the overall sentiment, and I'd collect some good quotes and probably some bad ones. But I think, the power of explaining like the gap between perception and reality, and getting to a place where I could bring their minds back to like, okay, well, if your perception is up here and the reality is here, and I bring you back down to here, and then I'm like, okay, how do we build from here? Then that is a great starting point, because that means we're all on the same level. And I would also say the incentive is, if you don't think about the experience of being here in 5 years, when, Gen Z is 50% of the workforce, you're going to have a really hard time attracting and recruiting and retaining people.
Yep. Completely.
It's just what it is. And that's a huge cost. Yep. It's a huge cost.
They'll be completely out of touch. Yeah. So any CEO, I won't say any, I don't want to make a blanket statement, but especially when the company is a larger company, you just get far removed from, the culture piece, and you're more driven
Naturally.
to right production and numbers, revenue, etc. So, throughout your experience, what companies have you identified or seen that you're aware of that are doing it right, that are making that bridge, that are making that connection, and you see not just because it's the shiny nickel, it's the Google, or it's the next big tech company, but what companies that are like, hey, they seem to have it right, because I see a lot of Gen Zers driven to that because of purpose and mission and their value.
I would say at a high level, it's companies who invest really heavily in their brands are
Hmm.
often ones that are, the ones that people want to work at. And it's not necessarily that employer brand or brand generally translates to a positive experience of work, but if you're trying to retain it or attract the next generation, you could do it just through really great marketing.
Hmm.
And I would also say, as far as the experience of work, organizations that are going out of their way, where the CEO willingly sits down with a young professional in the office one day just randomly and sparks up conversation, right? Like those people, those leaders who are willing to put the ego aside, or operate with little to no ego and just sit down and have a conversation with anyone about what matters to them. Those are the types of organizations where I find young people thrive the most. And actually, those sporadic conversations mean so much to those young professionals, because then they think, wow, this CXO took time out of their busy day to sit down with me for 15 minutes. Like that, that feels really good. That instills a lot of confidence in me that, like, that's actually not a really far or unattainable goal for me to hit, to be a CXO of this organization. And, maybe even if I end up somewhere else, that this person might be willing to invest in me still, and take the time to mentor me. And so I would say that's like the first thing, is like that, the leaders being willing to lean in and to talk to anyone. The second one is, organizations who do programming, where they're bringing different generations together. That could be through mentorship programs. It could be through lunch and learns, through workshops. But I've actually started to do some intergenerational workshops and facilitation, where I bring people together to talk about a topic. It could be mental health at work. It could be AI. It could be like all these different things, but you basically get people in a room together or virtually, and you break them out and you just try to get people talking to each other. And there are so many incredible, you know, like beautiful collisions that can happen when you just get people in a room together, and get them talking about something that is super relatable. So I think, those are two of the things that kind of stand out to me. And I would say just a third one is like organizations who aren't afraid to say the thing that is on everyone's mind.
Mm.
If there's a tough decision that's being made, I think this generation really values transparency. And so even if the answer is, I don't know, or I can't tell you why, but this is just the decision that's being made, and I'm going to do everything I can as your manager, as your leader, to protect you and to, fight for what matters to you and to us as a team and what makes us most productive. I think like that is the type of leadership, and the type of transparency we look for.
And I would think, because that there's so much that you've touched on in that, in what you said, is that one, the leaders need to be so aware, right, and so connected to the people and not just the product or service, that they're really invested in the culture, to say, okay, this is what we want. This way, we're not struggling for talent, because this is who we are. It's not just a great, marketing ploy, but it's something that once they're in here, they're like, wow, it's actually better than what I thought.
Yeah.
But right,
Actions over words.
correct. And I think I would say it's definitely easier for a company to come up with a great marketing strategy to attract, to your earlier point, and not fix the internal things that keeps them there. And so it's like you're doing all the work to fill an empty, a bucket with a hole in it because you haven't done the internal
Yeah.
work.
Yeah.
What?
Happens every day.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. So for companies and individuals, no, here's my question: with the talent that you're seeing now, still in that same scenario, you have that room of CEOs. What would you say they need to stop doing?
Mm.
This way they can attract, and retain, the next generation of talent.
Hmm.
Like, here's what, if you can't, the other things may be a little longer, but here's what I think you can start working on right now to stop doing.
Hmm. Don't call your place of work a family.
Hmm.
That's
Wow.
such a red flag.
Unpack that.
Such
Yeah.
a red flag. Yeah. I mean, unpack that. I mean,
Yeah.
it's like it's just a red flag for like young professionals to hear we're like a family.
Hmm.
I think it started, because it's like it was a trend a number of years ago to be like, oh, we're just a family. But it's like, yeah, but families are complicated and complex in their own way. And like family is
Hmm.
a really strong word. Like that's reserved for my own family. Like, what are you talking about? You're my family. And I think there is generally like this desire for a separation between like church and state for
Mm.
young people. I think I'm a little bit of an anomaly. I like work and life to be very intertwined. And of course, like there are moments when I feel overwhelmed and like I'm working on a Sunday and my family is downstairs celebrating something. And I'm like, oh, like I want to be downstairs and be with them. But I also have my own business. And like, I think that has to come first in some ways. So maybe a little different, but yeah, I think like we definitely value, again, going back to our our desires, our general desires in the workplace, to like have a job that sustains us, but that leaves room for us to focus on what we're passionate about and build a life around that, or with work in mind, but not necessarily at the center, I think is a big motivation. So to say, hey, you're like our family, and then to experience like a toxic work environment, something like
Hmm.
that, I think that leaves a bad taste in a lot of people's mouth. So that's one.
That's a big
uh,
one.
yeah, it's a big one. I would also say, you know, start trying to be mindful of your unconscious bias when it comes to age, because we live in a time where so much is democratized, right? Like access to people is democratized through the internet and social media platforms. You used to never be able to like get a hold of a CEO unless you're in the office with them on a random Wednesday, and even then they have a personal assistant in the front of their office, and like there's that kind of hierarchical structures are really, really present. And
Hmm.
now it's much less so. And so I would say, because and also because of the internet, it's like we all have access to the same information, give or take. And so stop trying to say that like young people don't know anything. And start being aware of your unconscious bias when it comes to young people, because there's a hell of a lot of young people that are impressive to me, and that in my opinion have accomplished a lot more or like been more successful. And honestly, the idea of success generally is kind of, what even is that? But
Right.
uh,
It's
we
relative.
see a number of like young people who are, and it gets younger and younger and younger, who are just being very successful. And so I would say like age is just a number. Focus on, experience and skills and what someone brings to the table in terms of how they think, because AI is coming for all of us.
Right.
Not to be a fear monger, but like it really is an equalizer. So how do we start to like see people for who they are, and what does like something like youth actually, what does that bring to the table? What's the value in that? And like trying to see the positives in
Yep.
each other more than the negatives. And I say that to both sides. I would say, it's like I think everyone is guilty of not doing that.
It's like we need a company and call it Kumbaya so we can all just come
Ah,
together, right? We're Kumbaya Inc.,
exactly.
right? So let's reverse that room before we close out. Let's reverse the audience. It's all Gen Zs now. What have you learned from the older generation that you can say, hey guys, they have a point, or give them grace here, or this is the best way to approach
Mm.
and help support closing the gap?
Ooh, I'm going to bring up actually uh, something that I came up with, a framework.
Mm-hmm.
And this is something that I present to young people, usually like college students or young grads.
Mm-hmm.
And it's called the CAPS method. Okay. And it's all around like the premise of it, and the context I give is like, it's amazing to like know who you are and to be able to confidently communicate that in the workplace. And it's important to also be mindful that you are but a speck in the universe, and you are but a coin in this equation of the general organization at large, right? And so, how do you remind yourself of that as an early career professional who, we all bring something really valuable to the table? And
Mm-hmm.
as someone who's younger in their career, like I can say, I probably have had times where I'm like over emphasizing my value, and like it doesn't come off well. So anyway, I say that to say this is the CAPS approach. Okay. K is know your place, right? Again, you are but a speck in the universe. You are also but a speck in the organization. And while it's great to know who you are and what you bring, it's also great to know your place. And A, act as a team player, right? It's
Mm-hmm.
like when you join any type of organization, whether it's a nonprofit or a club on college campus, like I always followed this of like, just sit and retain. And once you understand and once you've met enough people, then you share your opinion. Then you come to the table with solutions and potential solutions. And I think that that's a big one, acting as a team player. Also, thinking about one of the things I hear a lot from managers of Gen Z is like how your actions influence the team and the workflow. And so, if you decide to take a mental health day on a Friday and you have something that's due on Monday, if you want to take off Friday, then make sure that you get your work done over the weekend so
Mm-hmm.
that you're not impacting the entire team, because you could be, basically preventing everyone else from getting their work done, right? And being that blockage. The third one is in CAPS is P. So positivity always wins, right? I think as a generation, as like a society right now, we're very polarized. And so it's really easy to get swept up and feel down in the dumps, right? And I think mental health is really important. And you want to be thought of in the organization as someone who's positive, who's bringing not just problems, but solutions to the table, and being solutions oriented, being willing to tackle really hard problems, and to take on the work that no one else wants to do. That's often what I hear from older generations, and what I've personally experienced in growing your career, and just, being a team player. It's part of it. It's just being positive. And that will naturally make people attracted to you versus running away.
Mm-hmm.
And the S in CAPS is seek out mentors and mentors. So I think like when I ask people what the biggest influence on their career has been, they usually say, A, find people who like inspire you and try to
Mm-hmm.
follow their path. That's like probably the number one answer. And because of that, it's like, okay, so when as I'm going through my career, I'm obviously like acquiring mentors, but it's also important to recognize that when we're in these sorts of mentorship situations, there is still a power dynamic. And so I encourage people to not just find mentors, but also find friendtors, people who are their colleagues. Maybe it's their friends, people who they can really learn from and learn with. And so how I define that is it's a mutually beneficial, authentic, and vulnerable relationship between two people of any age, where the focus is the 3 L's. What can I learn? What can I leave to the world? And what can I leverage to help me grow in my career or in my life? So that's like the CAPS method. That would probably be what what I would share with my Gen Z colleagues and counterparts.
Absolutely love that. That's pretty powerful, because I think that has a level of introspection, right, that they need to consider versus, on both sides, versus sticking a flag in the sand and saying, "This is what it is. This is who I am." It's
And
like, oh, what?
that's inclusion, right? It's like it's rooted in inclusion and inclusion and belonging, and where you focus on, inclusion, the rest follows, is what I've learned.
Love it. Love it. Danielle, I appreciate you so much for joining me in such a short time.
Yes.
Again, I know you're in the midst of travels here, but final question for you that I ask my guest: what makes you wake up and do what you do every day?
I would say probably knowing that my job, my mission on this earth is to serve the world and make the world a better place. What we call it in Hebrew, it's tikkun olam, repairing the world. And I think that that's my role. And so in order to fulfill that role, I have to wake up every day and do what I do and make crazy things happen and make leaders care and make everyone really care more about each other. So I think it's really rooted in my faith.
Love it. You said make leaders care. Love that. Awesome. Share with the folks where they can find you, connect with you, work with you, hire you, all of that.
Yeah. So you can go to daniellefarage.com. Again, it's garage with an F. And I'm also a co-host of the HR morning show every Tuesday at 10 a.m. That is with 2 amazing podcasters, Adam Posner, who runs the podcast, and Joel Lalji, the realist recruiter, social media maven. He's really incredible. So we do that every Tuesday. So tune in there. We talk about current events, news. We have amazing guests on. I'm sure we'd love to have you on, Orlando. So it could be a little swap. And then, I'm heading to ERE, the recruiting conference in Vegas, in a week and a half. So you can find me there if you're going.
Nice. Again, appreciate your time. So wise. If I dare to say, in your youth. So you're definitely someone on the front lines that is not only sharing the Gen Z message, living it, but bringing solutions, right? So it's not just, you're not complaining. You're saying, hey guys, here's the solutions on how do we work together. And so I think that's it's a key separator for you. So appreciate it again. Everyone, if you're not following Danielle, you absolutely need to. Her content is hilarious, especially through her travels.
Thank you.
You got to connect with her. So appreciate everyone for tuning in, and we'll see you next time on the Career Talks podcast.
See ya.